The legacy paradox is this. The closer you get to the second half of life, the more your brain begins to worry that your life didn't really matter. Even when you've spent decades doing everything an ordinary, responsible person was supposed to do. You raised children. You showed up. You worked. You supported others. You carried responsibility year after year. And yet, at some point, a quiet, unsettling feeling appears. What will be left after me? Not a company, not a fortune, not something grand enough to point to and say, "This proves my life meant something." Most people can't even put this feeling into words. They just feel restless, uneasy, as if they should still be doing something important, but they don't know what. As if time has passed, and whatever was supposed to make their life significant never quite happened. This book explains why that feeling shows up, and why it's not telling you what you think it is. By the end of this book, you won't be trying to invent something big enough to justify your life. You won't be chasing a final achievement or forcing yourself into another role. What you will gain instead is a clear, steady sense of pride in what you have already given, and genuine gratitude for the legacy your life has already created. In real people, real outcomes, and real lives that continue beyond you. You'll be able to look at your past without panic or comparison, and recognize that significance was never about doing something extraordinary. It was about what quietly carried forward because you were here. And there is one more truth that almost no one says out loud. If you are here, now, at this point in your life, it is not by accident. Whatever you choose to call it, God, a higher intelligence, the universe, the order of things. Life itself does not continue without reason. Nothing exists by default unless it is needed. The simple fact that you were given this life, and that you are still living it, means that your presence has value exactly as it is. Not as who you were supposed to become, not as who you might have been if things had gone differently, but as the person you are now. If the world did not need you in this form, at this stage, with this experience, you would not be here. You would not have been carried this far. This understanding quietly dissolves the fear of being insignificant. It replaces self-doubt with something steadier. The recognition that your existence itself is evidence of meaning, and that your life has already been woven into the fabric of other lives, whether you were ever taught to see it that way or not. But first, let me tell you something that almost no one says out loud. You are an architect, not just of your own life, but of a house, a real one. Think about standing in front of a house at dusk. Your house, the one you built with your choices, year after year, decision after decision. You laid the foundation when you chose to show up even when it was hard. You built the walls when you kept going through doubt, through loss, through ordinary days that added up to decades. You filled the rooms with the people you loved, the values you held, the way you moved through the world. This house is solid. It has weathered storms. Some rooms were built differently than you planned, but it stands. It is yours. And now, in this season of your life, something is asking you to stop, to turn around, to look at what you've actually built. That something is your brain, finally ready to see. The most important things you built in this house, the values, the example, the way you showed up, these are still living in the people around you. They are still moving forward. They are still architecting futures you may never fully see. That is your legacy. And it is already real. The problem is not that you haven't built anything. The problem is that you have never turned around to look at what you've built. In the chapters ahead, we're going to do something simple. We're going to help you look. We'll examine the foundation of your house, where your influence is already living, where your mark is already permanent. We'll understand why your brain, in this exact season, began asking these questions. And we'll help you see it all clearly, through a practice so simple it feels like just noticing what's already there. By the end, you won't be searching for permission to feel proud. You'll recognize that the permission was always written in the lives around you. Chapter 1. You already left a mark. There is a moment that comes to almost everyone in the second half of life. You're sitting alone. Maybe it's early morning, maybe it's late at night. And a thought arrives quietly, without warning. What will be left after me? It's not a dramatic thought. You're not thinking about death or endings. You're thinking about evidence, proof, something you can point to and say, this is what I added to the world. This is where the fear lives. Because when you look around at what you've done, raised children, worked steadily, kept a marriage going, supported people, paid your bills, it all seems so ordinary, so temporary. You think, but did any of it actually matter? Here is what you need to know. You are looking in the wrong direction. The mark you left is not something you can see by looking at your career or your bank account or your achievements. You won't see it in your resume. You won't see it in a promotion or a business you built or a book you published. Your mark is already living in other people. There's a man from Ohio. He's 62 years old, 3 children, 5 grandchildren, 30 years working the same job. Not famous, not rich. Just a man who showed up and did what he was supposed to do. When he retired, something shifted. The structure that had held his life was gone. And for the first time in decades, he had to ask himself the question, did any of it matter? He'd spent 30 years building something, but not a company or a fortune. He'd spent 30 years in a factory, in meetings, in ordinary days that all looked the same. He raised his kids. He put them through college. He was there when they needed him and absent when work demanded it. He made choices that seemed small at the time. He modeled things without realizing he was modeling them. And then one day, his youngest grandson, he couldn't have been more than 8, said something that stopped him completely. The boy was talking about his dad, the grandfather's son. And the boy said, Dad says things the way Grandpa says things. Like when you know he means it because he doesn't yell. He just says it, and you know. The grandfather realized his grandson had never spent much time with him. They saw each other maybe twice a year. But his grandson knew his voice, knew his way of being, not from lectures or special moments, from watching his father move through the world shaped by how his father had moved through his own. The grandfather asked his son about it later. His son said, Yeah, I talk like you. I don't raise my voice at my kids like my friends do. I listen to them first. I think that came from you. I don't know when, but it's just how I do things now. The grandfather hadn't been trying to teach anything. He'd just been living, just showing up, just choosing patience over anger because that's who he was. And that way of being had become the blueprint for how his son raised his children. And now his grandchildren were learning from it, learning that you could be taken seriously without yelling, learning that patience meant strength, not weakness, learning that listening mattered. This is what your mark looks like. Not monuments, not something you can point to and prove, but something that has become the structure of how other people live, something that shapes their choices, something that moves forward without them even knowing where it came from. Your mark is not something you still need to create. It is something that's already real, already permanent, already living. You've been building it all along. Every time you showed up when you were tired, Every time you chose integrity when it would have been easier to choose comfort. Every time you loved someone without needing recognition for it. Every time you believed in someone. Every time you forgave someone. Every time you kept a promise. These moments seemed small when you were living them. They seemed ordinary. They seemed to disappear as soon as they happened. But they didn't disappear. They went into the people around you. They became part of how they see themselves. They became part of how they move through the world. They became the template they use to raise their own children. They became the values they carry forward. This is happening right now, without you knowing it. Your grandchild has a habit of your patience. Your friend makes a decision based on something you said years ago. Your colleague treats people with kindness because of the example you set. Your child raises their own children with the values you modeled, not because you told them to, but because they watched you live them. Your mark is not in the future. It is in the present. It is in the people around you. It is living and moving forward and continuing to shape the world in ways you may never see. The problem is not that you haven't left a mark. The problem is that you've never looked at it the right way. You've been waiting for some dramatic proof, some moment where someone tells you, "You changed my life," some achievement that feels big enough to justify everything. But that's not how it works. The most powerful marks are the ones that are so woven into people that they don't even know where they came from. They just know that's who they are. They just know that's how the world works. They just know that's what matters. Your mark is already there, in the way your daughter listens to her own children, in the way your son treats people, in the values that your grandchildren carry without knowing where they came from, in the people who are kinder because they knew you, in the people who believe in themselves more because someone believed in them. This is not small. This is everything. Legacy Journal Prompt. Take out your notebook. Right at the top. Who have I already changed without realizing it? Then ask yourself, who has been shaped by me, even quietly, even indirectly? Not just my children or grandchildren. Friends, co-workers, a neighbor, a student. Someone I helped once. Someone who watched how I handled a hard moment. Write down 5 names. If you can't think of 5, write down 2. If you can't think of 2, write down 1. Start where you are. For each name, complete this sentence. Because I was in their life, they learned that. Blank. Don't look for dramatic stories. Look for small, repeatable things. Patience, steadiness, honesty, showing up, keeping promises, listening, staying calm, doing the right thing when it wasn't convenient. Then complete this second sentence. I didn't have to be perfect to leave this mark. I only had to be present. Finally, write 1 paragraph answering this question. If my legacy is already living in people, what is the simplest proof I can name today? Chapter 2. The Paradox. Why invisible is the most powerful. There is something counterintuitive about legacy that most people don't understand until they reach the second half of life. The things that seem the most important while you're doing them often turn out to be the least important in the end. And the things that seem small, ordinary, barely worth noticing, those are the ones that endure. This is the paradox at the heart of what it means to leave something behind. You spend decades building a career. The climbing, the achieving, the earning, it all happens. And then you retire. And the entire identity you spent so much time constructing simply dissolves. Your colleagues move on to other things. Your position is filled by someone else who will eventually retire too. The projects you thought defined you become someone else's responsibility. The business you helped build continues without you, which is exactly how it should be. Your name fades from the walls. The success you fought for becomes history. But something very different happens with the quiet things. The way you treated people becomes part of how they treat others. The values you lived by travel forward through generations without fanfare. The example you set shapes choices in people you may never see. The love you gave without keeping score becomes the foundation of how someone else moves through the world. The invisible walls you built stay standing. They hold up entire families. They shape how people make decisions. They become the architecture that people live inside without ever knowing who built it. Which one was actually more important? There was a teacher who taught high school English for 47 years. Not famous, not rich. Never became a principal or an administrator. She just showed up to a classroom and taught teenagers how to read deeply, write clearly, and think about what mattered. She was the kind of teacher who asked questions instead of giving answers, who treated student writing like it was serious work, who believed that what teenagers had to say was worth listening to. She had a small classroom. She made a modest salary. She graded papers at night and spent her summers preparing lessons. She never complained about it, and she never expected anyone to notice. She retired 3 years ago. Last month, someone sent her a letter. It was from a former student, now 56 years old. That student had become a therapist. She wrote, "I want you to know what that class meant to me. You taught me that my voice mattered, that what I thought was worth writing down, that other people's lives were worth understanding. I became a therapist because of that. I spend every day now listening to people tell their stories. And I listen the way you taught me to listen, without trying to fix, without trying to be clever, just truly hearing them." That teacher's career was ordinary by every external measure. She made a modest salary. She had no titles. She never appeared on a stage or published anything or built an empire. If you looked at her professional achievements on paper, they would seem small and unremarkable. But she changed the way a person listened. And that person spent 56 years using that listening to change other people's lives. How many people has that therapist helped? How many have been shaped by the simple act of being truly heard? How many of those people went on to help someone else? The teacher never knew. She just showed up to a classroom and taught one class at a time, one student at a time, one moment at a time. She never imagined the architecture she was building. She never knew that her small classroom was becoming the blueprint for how someone would spend their entire life. This is what your brain knows, even if you haven't named it yet. In the second half of your life, your brain is not interested in impressive titles anymore. It's not interested in how much you accumulated or what you owned or how high you climbed. It's interested in what lasted. It's interested in what moved forward. It's interested in what shaped people, not what got you recognition or applause or a corner office. This is why you're asking the question now. This is why the panic comes. Because you're starting to see the difference between what you thought would make your life significant and what actually does. The achievements and promotions and visible accomplishments fade. They dissolve into history. They become someone else's achievement. But the quiet things don't fade at all. The way you treated people becomes part of how they treat others. The values you lived by travel forward through generations without your name attached to them. The example you set shapes choices in people you may never see. The love you gave without keeping score becomes the foundation of how someone else moves through the world. These things are invisible, but they don't disappear. They multiply. They become part of the architecture that holds everything forward. Your brain, in this season of life, is finally ready to recognize what was always true. The invisible things are the most powerful. The grander things are actually more fragile. A business you build can go bankrupt. A reputation can be forgotten. A success can be overshadowed by someone else's greater success. But a value you live by? That lives in people. It gets passed down. It shapes futures in ways you'll never see. It becomes the way your grandchildren move through the world. It becomes how your friend makes a decision. It becomes the foundation of someone's entire life. This is why the fear comes with such force now. Because you're finally understanding that the things you thought were small, the daily choices, the quiet kindnesses, the way you showed up even when no one was watching, those were actually the only things that mattered. And the things you spent so much time chasing, those were never the point. You can't go back and do it differently. You can't suddenly become famous or build an empire. And thank God for that. Because the most important work of your life was never about those things. It was always about the invisible work. The work you were doing whether anyone was watching or not. The work that became part of other people. The work that is still moving forward right now, shaping the world without your name on it. That is not a loss. That is the definition of a legacy. Legacy Journal Prompt. Take out your notebook. Write at the top. What quiet thing lasted longer than my biggest achievements? Then ask yourself, what do I think should have been my legacy? A job title? A paycheck? A reputation? A visible accomplishment? And what has actually lasted? Make 2 columns on the page. Column A, visible wins. Column B, invisible impact. Under column A, write 3 things you chased or worked hard for that felt important at the time. Under column B, write 3 quiet things that seem ordinary but may have shaped people. The way you treated others, the way you showed up in a hard season, the way you listened, the values you lived without talking about them. Then answer this question in writing. If no one remembered my name, what part of me would still be moving forward through other people? Finish by completing this sentence 3 times. The invisible thing I did that mattered most was blank. Don't try to impress yourself. Don't try to rank your life. Just notice what lasted. That's Chapter 2. Invisible is powerful. Chapter 3. Your brain knows what it's looking for. Recognition. There's a shift that happens somewhere in midlife. It's not dramatic. You don't wake up one morning and feel completely different. But gradually, over months and years, something changes in how your mind works. The questions you ask yourself change. The things that keep you awake at night change. The way you measure whether a day was good or bad changes. When you were younger, the questions were different. Am I climbing? Am I winning? Am I becoming someone? Am I getting closer to what I imagined for myself? These questions drove you. They kept you moving. They gave shape to your days. You measured your life in achievements and titles and progress. You knew what you were building toward. You were the architect with blueprints in hand, moving forward, always toward the next level of the structure. But somewhere along the way, those questions stopped working. They stopped mattering as much, and new questions started appearing. What did all of this actually mean? What did I actually create? Did I spend my time on the things that mattered? Who have I become through all of this living? What house did I actually build? This shift is not a weakness. This shift is your brain becoming ready to do different work. It's your brain finally getting the space and the time to ask, what was actually real about my life? It's your brain putting down the blueprints and turning around to look at the structure that's already standing. Your brain has spent decades in forward motion. It has been oriented entirely toward the future. It has been asking what's next, what's coming, what could I become? It has been in building mode, achievement mode, proving mode. There are entire neural networks in your brain that were devoted to this forward momentum. They were firing on all cylinders for 40, 50, 60 years. The builder in you was always working, always planning, always moving. You were so focused on what came next that you rarely looked at what was already built. But your brain is also built to integrate. It has systems designed to look back, to connect the pieces, to make meaning out of the raw material of your life. These systems have been quieter, waiting. They have been running in the background while the ambitious parts of your brain took center stage. They've been like a patient architect, putting down tools and waiting for the moment when construction finally pauses, when there's finally time to step back and look at what the building has become. Now those systems are ready. Now your brain is ready to do the work it was waiting to do. Now it wants to turn around and look at what you actually built. Now the architect in you wants to walk through the house, room by room, and recognize what happened here. This is not something you lost. This is something you finally gained access to. The ability to see, the ability to integrate and to recognize what was actually happening while you were living it. This is happening whether you understand it or not. And if you don't understand it, if you don't give this work the space it needs, your brain will get restless. It will create anxiety. The nagging feeling that something is missing, that something is wrong, that you should be doing something but you don't know what. It will create regret that won't settle. It will create comparison to others whose lives seem more significant. It will create the sense that you're running out of time to fix something you can't quite name. The architect becomes frustrated, pacing through empty rooms, unable to articulate what's wrong. But if you understand what's happening, if you let your brain do this work, something different happens. Your brain shows you what was actually there all along. It shows you the architecture you built. It shows you which walls hold the most weight. It shows you the rooms filled with real life, real choices, real impact. This is not therapy. This is the natural unfolding of how human brains work. Your brain was building forward for decades. Now it's walking through the structure you created. Now it's integrating. Now it's making sense. It's recognizing. And here's what matters. This is not a sign that something is wrong. This is a sign that something is finally right. This is a sign that you have lived long enough to have something to integrate, that you have become someone, that you have built something, and now your brain wants to acknowledge what that someone is. Now the architect wants to stand in the doorway and see the whole house at once. This window will not stay open forever. Right now, in this season, your brain is ready. This is why the feeling comes with such urgency sometimes. Not panic about time running out in the sense of death or ending, but panic about time running out to do this crucial work. To finally recognize what you've built, to finally walk through the house before the light changes. Your brain has been carrying all of this. Your brain knows what it's looking for. It's looking for you. The person who built the house you've been standing in without seeing. The architect who was so focused on the blueprints that they never looked up to see what was being created. Now it's time to look. Now is when your brain is ready to show you. Legacy Journal Recognition. Take out your notebook. Answer the questions below. If a question doesn't resonate, move on to the next one. 1. What do people often rely on you for? Think about what others actually come to you for in real life. 2. When you look back, how have you usually shown up in difficult situations? You can answer with a few simple words, not a story. Now write this sentence and complete it honestly. Looking at my life as a whole, I can see that I have been someone who blank. A word or a short phrase is enough. You are not explaining your life. You are simply recognizing what has already been there. That's all this chapter asks. Chapter 4. The Audit. Regrets as evidence of your values. Your culture teaches you that regret is a waste of energy. Let it go, they say. Move forward. The past is the past. Dwelling on what you didn't do or what you did wrong is self-indulgent, unproductive, a sign that you haven't healed yet. But there is something your culture doesn't understand about the second half of life, and your brain is trying to tell you what it is. Regret is not evidence of failure. Regret is evidence of values. It's your inner compass announcing what actually mattered to you, not the loud things that society told you should matter, but the quiet, deep things that you cared about so much that losing them, betraying them, violating them, that's what kept you awake at night. Every regret you carry is a map. It shows you where your values live. It shows you what you cared about deeply, even when you didn't live according to it. And sometimes, most times, it shows you something beautiful about who you actually are beneath all the choices you made and the paths you took. The problem is not that you have regrets. The problem is that you've been taught to hide them, to minimize them, to move past them quickly without ever actually looking at what they're trying to tell you. And so you carry them silently, like stones in your pockets, for decades. Michael was 65 when the understanding finally came, and it arrived in the waiting room of a hospital in Connecticut. He'd been married for 39 years, not happily, not unhappily, but in that way that long marriages often become a kind of structure. Two people living in proximity, raising children, making a life together, while the warmth slowly faded into something more like habit. Somewhere along the way, they became polite strangers who shared a house and a history. There was respect between them, maybe even affection, but the presence had left. The feeling of being chosen, of being seen, that had quietly disappeared. When he was 43 years old, he'd had an affair. It lasted 8 months. It wasn't passionate or transformative, or the kind of betrayal that feels dramatic in the moment. It was quieter than that. It was just a moment where he stepped outside the structure and felt what it was like to be wanted again, to be someone's focus, to have someone look at him like he mattered. And then it ended, the way these things do, and he came home to a wife who somehow knew, who didn't say anything, but whose presence in the house became a different kind of cold. The scar tissue formed. They stayed. They raised their children. They built a life. But something had broken, and breaking wasn't one dramatic event. It was 30 years of continuing anyway, of being loyal by default, of knowing what he'd done and knowing what it meant. For 3 decades, he carried this regret. It sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't set down. He told himself the story that most men tell themselves in this situation. He was selfish, reckless, proof that he wasn't a good man. He moved through his life telling himself that story, reinforcing it, letting it shape how he saw himself. He was a man who had betrayed someone, a man who had broken something that couldn't be repaired, a man who had failed at the basic human requirement of fidelity. But then his wife had a health scare. Nothing terminal, nothing that changed her life, but serious enough to be a reminder. And sitting in that waiting room while tests were being run, waiting to know if the woman he'd lived with for nearly 40 years would be okay, something shifted inside him. He suddenly understood something about his regret that he'd never quite seen before. He regretted the affair. That was true, but not for the reason he'd been telling himself all these years. He didn't regret it because he was a bad man. That story had never quite fit, had never quite felt true even when he was telling it to himself most forcefully. He regretted it because it was a betrayal of something he actually valued deeply. He had betrayed fidelity. Not fidelity as a rule imposed from outside, not as something the church or society told him he should value, but as something that mattered to him in a way that felt bone deep and true. When he was younger, he'd thought integrity was about following rules. It was about doing what you were supposed to do, showing up, playing the part. But now, in this waiting room, looking at his regret clearly for the first time in 30 years, he understood something different. Integrity wasn't about rules. It was about being faithful to what you said mattered to you. And he had said fidelity mattered, not with words, with how he'd structured his life, with the promises he'd made, with the commitments he'd chosen. And when he violated that, he felt it breaking, his own breaking. The affair wasn't a sign that he was a bad man. It was a sign that he was confused, that he'd wanted to feel something, to be something, and had chosen a path that contradicted the deepest thing he believed about himself. But here's what changed everything. When he finally looked at the regret clearly, he understood that the regret itself was proof. It proved that he valued fidelity. Because if he didn't value it, he wouldn't regret violating it. You don't regret what doesn't matter to you. You only regret what does. The regret wasn't a punishment. It was a compass. It was pointing him towards something true about himself. A value so deep that even when he violated it, he knew he had violated it. Even when he broke his own integrity, he felt it breaking. At 65, he couldn't undo the affair. He couldn't go back and erase the 30 years of scar tissue, couldn't make the breach unhappen, couldn't give his wife back the years when she knew and had to carry that knowledge while staying in the marriage anyway. But what he could do was look at his regret and finally understand what it was actually telling him. Fidelity matters to me. Being faithful to my values matters. That's who I am underneath the confusion and the fear and the need to feel wanted. That's the person I actually am. And something shifted. Not in his past, but in his present, and therefore in his future. He began to be present with his wife differently. Not to punish himself, not out of guilt, but because he finally understood what he actually valued. He chose, consciously and clearly, to be faithful. Not because he had to, but because it was true. Because fidelity was part of the architecture of who he wanted to be. And he'd wasted 30 years not recognizing that, not living it consciously, not choosing it as his own value rather than just following a rule that he resented. His wife noticed the change, not dramatically, not in some movie moment, but steadily. A presence, an attention, a choosing of her again, this time with full consciousness. It didn't erase the past. The scar tissue was still there. But it was like looking at an old wound and suddenly understanding what it meant. Not as something broken, but as evidence of what mattered. This is what regret does when you finally look at it without shame. Your regrets are not evidence that you're a bad person. They're evidence that you have values. Deep ones. Real ones. The kind of values that don't disappear even when you violate them. The kind of values that haunt you because they matter to you. Every regret is a conversation with yourself about what you actually care about. It's not a punishment. It's a map. The woman who regrets not being present for her children, that regret reveals that presence mattered to her. Attention, connection, the quality of showing up not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. Those things were important enough that their absence created a scar. The regret proves the value. The man who regrets staying in a job he hated instead of pursuing his passion reveals something different. That authenticity mattered to him. That living his own life, not someone else's script, was important. The fact that he regrets not doing it proves that it was real to him, that he knew what he wanted, and that staying small cost him something. The person who regrets harsh words spoken in anger reveals that kindness mattered to them. Gentleness, connection with another person's heart, the fact that they carry it, that it still bothers them, proves it was real. This is the audit your brain wants you to do in this season of your life. Not to punish yourself, not to dwell in shame or wallow in regret, but to look clearly at what you regret and let it show you what you actually valued, what mattered, what was real about you underneath everything. And here's what's most important. That's not failure. That's the foundation of your house. Those values, the ones you violated, the ones you regretted violating, those are the architecture of who you actually are. They're proof that you cared, that you knew, somewhere inside, what mattered. And even when you didn't live according to it, the fact that you regretted it meant you hadn't lost sight of it. You knew. You just couldn't live it yet. You are not defined by your regrets. You are defined by what your regrets reveal about you. And what they reveal is that you valued something real, something deep, something that mattered enough to make you grieve when you violated it. Michael spent 30 years ashamed of his affair. But in doing this audit, in looking at what the regret was actually telling him, he discovered something else entirely. He discovered that he was a man who valued faithfulness so much that even his violation of it became a kind of proof that he believed in it. His regret was not a sign of moral weakness. It was a sign of moral clarity. He knew deep down what he believed in, and the fact that he hurt himself by violating it was just more evidence that the value was real, that it mattered, that it was part of his actual architecture. That's a foundation. That's architecture. That's the structure of a life that actually stands for something. Now, at 65, at what might be the end of his life, or what might be the beginning of a new chapter, he can look back and see the pattern. He can see where his deepest values lived. He can see what mattered to him, even in the choices that contradicted it. He can see that the architecture of his life, flawed as it was, broken in places, rebuilt and repaired over and over, was built on something real, something that meant something, that changes everything. Because now he's not a man defined by his failures. He's a man who is awake to his values, who understands what mattered to him, who can, in whatever time he has left, live consciously in alignment with what he now sees clearly. He doesn't have to redo the past. He has to be awake to the present. He has to choose, with clear eyes and full consciousness, how to spend the time that remains. And that choice is made possible only by looking at the regret and letting it show him what was true all along. This is the work of the audit. Not to make you feel guilty about your past, but to help you see what was always true. That beneath the confusion, beneath the fear, beneath the need to belong or achieve or survive, there were values, real ones, ones you cared about deeply, ones that shaped your choices, even when you violated them, ones that created regret. And regret is just another word for knowing what matters and knowing you didn't live it. That knowledge is not a curse. It's a gift. Because now you know. Knowing, you can choose. You can decide how you want to spend whatever time is left. You can build, consciously and with full sight, on the foundation that your regrets have revealed. Your house has a foundation. You've known what mattered all along. The regrets just made it visible. Legacy Journal Prompt. Take out your notebook. Write at the top, what regret reveals my deepest value? Then ask yourself, what do I regret? Don't censor it. Don't minimize it. Write it down. The choices, the words, the presents you didn't give, the path you didn't take. Don't explain it away or justify it. Just name it. Then ask, why does this regret still matter to me? What does this regret tell me about what I actually value? Not what I think I should value. Not what's impressive. What do I actually care about? For example, I regret not being present for my children reveals that presence and attention mattered to me. Or, I regret not pursuing my passion reveals that authenticity and living my own life mattered to me. I regret harsh words spoken in anger reveals that kindness and connection mattered to me. Don't try to justify the past. Don't try to fix it now. Just let the regret show you what was important. Write, this regret proves I valued blank, then sit with that for a moment. Let it land. That's the foundation. That's what you were actually building toward all along. That's who you actually are underneath everything. Chapter 5. Generativity. There is a word that psychology uses for what happens in the second half of life, and that word is generativity. It doesn't mean what you might think. It's not about generating income or generating results or generating anything visible or measurable. Generativity is about creating something that will outlive you. It happens through the quiet, almost invisible transmission of values and ways of being from one generation to the next, and not just through bloodlines. Your way of being ripples through everyone you touch. Colleagues, friends, strangers. People you'll never know who learn something from you. The problem is that most people never realize that generativity is already happening in their lives. You think it's something you still need to accomplish, something you should be doing more intentionally, something that requires deliberate effort and a clear plan. The truth is much simpler and much more profound. Your life is already teaching. Your way of being is already transmitting. The values you've lived by, the choices you've made, the way you move through the world, all of it is being absorbed by the people around you and passed forward to the people they love. You are an architect of invisible things. You don't even have to try. Johan Vaaler was born in Norway in the 1800s. He was not famous. He did not set out to change the world. He was just a man who worked with wire and metal and thought about problems. In 1899, he bent a piece of wire into a shape that could hold papers together. It was simple, elegant, a solution to a small problem that existed in every office and home. He called it a paperclip. He patented it. He tried to sell it. Nobody was particularly interested. It was too simple, perhaps, too ordinary to seem valuable. He sold the patent for a small amount of money, so small that it barely made any difference to his life. He never became famous for it. Nobody put his name on the invention. He lived his life quietly in Norway and died in 1910, probably without ever knowing what his small idea would become. 125 years later, the paperclip is everywhere, in every office on the planet, in every school, in every drawer, in every home. Billions and billions of them, manufactured every year, holding documents together, holding papers together, holding small things in place. It's one of the most common objects in human civilization, and nobody knows Johan Vaaler's name. That's generativity. Your simple idea, your small solution, your quiet contribution becomes so woven into the fabric of how the world works that people stop even seeing it. It becomes invisible because it's everywhere. Your life works the same way, except the ripples are human. The transmission happens through values, through ways of being, through the quiet presence that shapes how people understand themselves. Eleanor was 71 years old when we talked, and she'd spent her entire life raising children, supporting her husband, showing up to church on Sundays, and being present for her neighbors when they needed help. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make a biography or a news story. Just a woman who chose kindness in 1,000 small moments, who listened when people needed to talk, who showed up even when it was inconvenient. She had 5 grandchildren, teenagers and young adults, scattered across the country, each living their own lives. Eleanor sometimes wondered whether any of it had mattered. All those years of showing up, all that presence, all those small kindnesses that nobody really acknowledged or remembered. One day her granddaughter called. She was getting married and wanted Eleanor there. Wanted her input on something that mattered. During that conversation, something stopped Eleanor completely. "Grandma, I want to be like you when I'm old. Not because of anything you told me, but because I watched you. The way you listen to people, the way you don't interrupt, the way you remember what people say and bring it up later, the way you make people feel like they matter. I realized that I want my whole life to be like that. So I'm building my wedding around that. Who matters? The people I love. That's it. Just the people I love, and making sure they feel it." Eleanor's granddaughter had absorbed something so fundamental about how to live that it became the architecture of her entire life. Eleanor had never taught her explicitly. There had been no serious conversations about values. Eleanor had simply lived it, day after day, year after year, in the quiet repetition of small choices. Now Eleanor's great-grandchildren would grow up watching their mother, Eleanor's granddaughter, make the same choices. One day, 70 years from now, there might be a great-great-granddaughter who would say, "I want my whole life to be about the people I love, about making sure they feel it." That's the family line. That's one thread of generativity. But Eleanor's influence didn't stop with her family. When she was 53 years old, she worked in an office as a receptionist. Not a high-status job, not glamorous. She sat at a desk, answered phones, and greeted people as they came through the door. During those years, visitors came to her desk every single day and saw how she treated them. With genuine interest, with a real smile, with a kind of presence that made people feel like they mattered, even if they were only stopping by to pick up their mail. One of those people was a man named David. He worked in that same office for 15 years. David watched Eleanor. He noticed the way she made space for people, the way she asked about their lives, the way she remembered things from conversations weeks before. Over time, without realizing it, something shifted inside him. He became kinder at work. He listened more. He paid attention to people who had previously been invisible to him. Years later, David became a manager. His entire approach to management had been shaped by watching Eleanor answer phones. He treated his employees the way Eleanor had treated the people who came to her desk. Remembered their names, asked about their families, made sure they knew they mattered. His employees felt seen. Some of them, in their own careers, began to manage people the same way. The ripple spread far beyond Eleanor. People who never met her began to treat others with more kindness because David had learned it from watching her. And those people taught others. And on it goes. That's generativity. Not just in your family, in your wake. There's the friend who watched you handle a crisis with grace when you could have fallen apart. What you showed them was that it's possible to move through hard things, that composure can exist even when everything is breaking. Years later, when that friend faced their own crisis, your face came to mind. The way you'd moved through loss, the way you'd stayed present, Your example became their roadmap. Without even knowing it, without ever having an explicit conversation about it, your way of being became part of how your friend understands what's possible, or the colleague who watched you stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. You didn't make a big deal of it. You just did it. You spoke. What that colleague saw was that you could be kind and strong at the same time. That you didn't have to choose between being nice and being honest. Integrity and compassion could live together. Your colleague began doing the same thing in their own way, in their own life, and the people around that colleague began to understand what integrity looks like. Or the stranger at the grocery store. Their cart was too full. They were clearly overwhelmed, and you smiled at them. You offered to help. 5 minutes. You probably forgot it immediately. But that person didn't forget. At home, thinking about what had happened, about the kindness of a stranger who asked nothing in return, something shifted. The next week, that person helped someone else. At work, at home, in the moment. And when they thought about it, they remembered you. They told their spouse about the person who helped them. Gradually, they began to notice kindness in the world differently. Your 5 minutes of presence became part of how they see the world and move through it. That's how this works. You have no idea who you're shaping. You have no idea which moment, which choice, which quiet example becomes the thing that changes someone's life. It might be someone you knew well. It might be someone you'll never see again. It might be a stranger whose name you never even learned. The difference between generativity and the legacy you've been taught to chase is simple. Legacy chasing demands something big, something visible, something with your name on it. Generativity happens through presence, through the repetition of small choices, through showing up again and again, living your values without needing anyone to notice. Your grandchildren are learning how to be human by watching you. Your children are making decisions based on what you modeled. Your friends are braver because of what you've shown them. Your colleagues are kinder because of the example you set. The stranger you helped at the grocery store changed how they see the world. Your former employee, now a manager, treats people with dignity because of what you modeled. Your neighbor learned kindness from you. Your friend's spouse learned what loyalty looks like. An acquaintance learned what honesty looks like. You have no idea how far forward this ripples. The impact is invisible. That doesn't mean it isn't real. Think about the small choices you made that seemed insignificant at the time. The way you handled a conflict without yelling. The time you admitted you were wrong. The moment you chose patience instead of anger. The conversation where you believed in someone when nobody else did. The example you set by showing up again and again, even when the work was hard and nobody was watching. Those moments seemed small while you were living them. They felt ordinary. They seemed to disappear as soon as they happened. But inside the people who watched you, something took root. The template became clear. The blueprint became visible. Now those same people are teaching it to their children. Those children are teaching it to their children. The friend you helped is teaching their friends. The colleague you inspired is managing with kindness. The stranger you helped is extending kindness to others. The chain moves forward invisibly, without anyone knowing where it started. You don't know how far this reaches. You don't know which moment, which choice, which quiet example will ripple forward for generations. It might be the way you spoke to someone when nobody else was listening. It might be the way you kept a promise when it would have been easier to break it. It might be the way you treated someone with dignity when the world was telling them they didn't deserve it. It could be something as simple as the way you made tea for someone who was grieving, the way you asked a question instead of giving advice, The way you showed up, just by showing up, without needing anything in return. The way you stayed calm when things fell apart. The way you admitted you didn't have all the answers. The way you chose to listen instead of fix. One day, 70 years from now, someone might make a choice based on something you did. Where it came from will be lost to history. What will remain is the choice itself, and the fact that it mattered. It shaped how that person sees the world and moves through it. And from there, it goes forward to someone else. And on it goes. That's your legacy. The things you left in people. The ways of being that became so natural to them, they don't even realize they came from you. The values woven so deeply into their lives that they've become part of who they are. Not just in your family, but in everyone you've ever touched, including people you've never met. And the most important thing about silent generativity is this. It isn't something you have to earn, prove, or accomplish. It's something you're already doing. Every day. Every choice. Every moment of presence. Every moment of patience. Every time you choose your values over your comfort. All of it is already building something that will outlive you. You don't have to be famous to be generative. You don't have to build an empire. You don't have to change the world in a way anyone would notice. You only have to keep showing up. Keep making the choices that matter to you. Keep choosing presence over performance. Keep living your values without needing applause. That will ripple forward through your family, through your friends, through your colleagues, through strangers, through people you'll never know, through generations you won't live to see. Your life is not a private thing. It's an architecture other people live inside. It's a blueprint shaping how they understand the world. It's a silent transmission of what you cared about, what you valued, what you believed about what it means to be human. And it spreads further than you can imagine. Johann Wahler bent a piece of wire into a shape in 1899. He didn't know it would be used for 125 years. He didn't know it would touch billions of lives. He didn't know his small, simple idea would become one of the most ubiquitous objects in human civilization. He never became famous for it. Nobody remembered his name. But the paperclip is everywhere. In places he never imagined, in uses he never conceived, rippling forward through time, touching lives, solving problems, holding things together. Your life is like that. Your legacy travels through people, through ways of being, through values that become so woven into the lives of the people you love and the people you've never met, that the origins disappear. What remains is the inheritance. What remains is the way people understand what it means to be human. You don't know what of yours will ripple forward. You don't know which moment, which choice, which quiet example will matter most. Your patience might become your grandchild's foundation. Your kindness might become your great-grandchild's religion. Your honesty might teach a stranger how to be truthful. Your presence might be what teaches someone 70 years from now that they matter. But it will. That's what silent generativity means. Not recognition, not fame. The invisible, unstoppable transmission of what you value into the lives of people you love and people you'll never know. A spreading outward with no limits. And that transmission is already happening. Right now, in every moment you choose your values, in every moment you show up, in every moment you demonstrate without words what it means to live a life that matters. That's your legacy. Something you're already building every single day in every person whose life you touch. Legacy Journal Prompt. Take out your notebook. Write at the top. What am I already transmitting? Then ask yourself, what do I live by without saying it out loud? What values am I demonstrating every day simply by being myself? What do I do repeatedly that the people around me see, absorb, and potentially pass forward? Think about the people in your life right now, not just family, but colleagues, friends, neighbors, even strangers you encounter. What do they see when they watch you? Right. The way I, blank, is teaching the people around me that blank matters. For example, the way I listen without interrupting is teaching the people around me that their voice matters. The way I admit when I'm wrong is teaching that mistakes are part of being human. The way I treat the person behind the counter is teaching that everyone deserves respect. Don't worry about whether they'll remember. Don't worry about whether it will matter. Just name what you're already teaching, simply by living. That's generativity. That's legacy. Chapter 6. The Legacy Journal. Your daily mirror. There is a practice that changes everything, and it is so simple that most people dismiss it before they even try it. 10 minutes. That's all. 10 minutes a day with a notebook or a phone, answering one simple question. Not a self-improvement exercise, not a productivity hack. This is something else entirely. This is a daily meeting between you and the house you've been building all your life. The Legacy Journal is not about fixing yourself. It's about seeing. That's it. Just seeing what's actually there. What's already real. What's already been built. Your brain has been collecting this information for decades. It has been storing it, holding it, waiting for the moment when you would finally be ready to look at it. That moment is now. The way this works is not complicated. Each day, you ask yourself a question. The questions change, but they all point in the same direction, toward the architecture you've already created. Sometimes the question comes from one of the earlier chapters. Sometimes it's simply, what did I notice today about the house I've built? What did I see in someone else's life that reflected something I passed on? What am I grateful for in my own life that I never really acknowledged before? You write for 10 minutes. Not carefully. Not trying to make it sound good. You just notice. You just write down what's true. You might write about your daughter and the way she listens to her children, and suddenly you understand that she learned that from you. You might write about a choice your grandchild made and realize that choice carries your values, or about a conversation with a friend, and see how you influence that person without ever trying to. You might write about a mistake you made decades ago, and finally understand why you made it and what it taught you. This is what the journal does. It trains your brain to see what was always there. There is a part of your brain that has been waiting for permission to do this. It's the part that connects the pieces into one coherent story. Scientists call it the default mode network. It's the system that activates when you're not focused on an external task, when you're not doing, but reflecting. This system has been running in the background your whole life, but in the second half of life, it becomes dominant. It becomes what your brain actually wants to do. The Legacy Journal gives this system what it needs. It gives it space. It gives it a structure. It gives it permission. Every time you sit down for 10 minutes and ask yourself one of these questions, you're essentially saying to your brain, okay, I'm ready. Show me what you've been holding. Show me the architecture. Show me who I am. What happens is subtle but profound. Your brain relaxes. The anxiety that comes from having something important that you can't quite name, that starts to settle. The restlessness that comes from knowing you need to do something, but not knowing what begins to quiet. The fear that you're running out of time to understand your own life transforms into clarity. Because as you write, your brain shows you patterns you didn't notice while you were living them. It shows you the through line of your values. It shows you how a choice you made decades ago rippled forward and shaped someone else's life. It shows you that the things you thought were failures were actually teachings, and invisible work was the only work that mattered. This is why the journal is more powerful than any list of achievements could ever be. A list of achievements is something you have to prove to yourself. But the journal is not like that. The journal is just recognition, just noticing what's actually there. And when your brain sees what's actually there, everything shifts. The need to prove something dissolves. The panic about whether you did enough dissolves. What remains is gratitude and the simple, steady knowledge that your life was real, and it mattered, and it still matters. How you structure the journal is less important than the fact that you do it. Some people write the same question every day for a week. Some people rotate through different questions. Some people let the questions come naturally, based on what happened that day. There's no wrong way to do this. The structure is just a container for the work, and the work is the seeing. But here's what I would suggest, if you're starting today. Begin with the questions from the chapters you've read. From Chapter 1, who have I already influenced without realizing it? From Chapter 2, what invisible thing that I built has turned out to be the most powerful? From Chapter 3, what is my brain finally ready to see about my own life? From Chapter 4, what am I grateful for, even in my mistakes? From Chapter 5, what value have I passed on without ever trying to teach it? Rotate through these. Spend a week with one question, then move to the next. Write whatever comes. Don't edit yourself. Don't try to sound wise or profound. Just notice. Just be honest. Just let your brain show you what it's been holding. Some days you will write about people, your children, your grandchildren, people you worked with, people you influenced. Some days you will write about moments, a conversation, a decision, a time you showed up. Some days you will write about values, honesty, kindness, persistence, courage. Some days you will write about regrets and discover they weren't failures at all, but evidence that you were paying attention to what mattered. And something will happen that you won't expect. After a few weeks, you'll start to see the pattern, the architecture, the house. It will start to become clear to you that your life was not random. Your choices were connected. The person you became was not an accident. The influence you had was not small. The mark you left was not temporary. It will start to become impossible to deny that you built something real. This is what the journal does. It's not changing you. It's revealing you. The practice itself is so simple that it's almost easy to miss how profound it is. 10 minutes. One question. Honest writing. But what this does is align your conscious mind with what your brain already knows. Your brain has been integrating it all along. It has been making connections and holding the threads of your life together. But your conscious mind has been too busy, too distracted, too focused on what comes next to notice. The journal creates a bridge between those two parts of yourself. It says, okay, here's the space, here's the time, here's permission, show me what you know. And when you do this consistently, when you do this day after day, something settles in you. You become someone who has finally looked at their own house and recognized it as home. Someone who has finally seen the architecture and understood that they were the architect all along. This is not a tool you use for 30 days and then stop. This is a practice for the rest of your life, because the more you look, the more you see. Your brain has been waiting for this. The mirror is ready. All you have to do is look. Chapter 7. You don't owe anything, only freedom to choose. There is a particular kind of relief that comes when you finally stop trying to prove something. It's the moment you set down a weight you didn't even realize you were carrying. The moment you understand that the exam is already over, that you passed it long ago, and that there is nothing left to defend. This is what happens when you truly recognize your legacy. The quiet pressure that has been running in the background for decades, the need to prove that your life meant something, that your choices were right, that you were significant enough, begins to dissolve. You stop measuring yourself against an imaginary standard. You stop reaching for a version of yourself that feels larger, more impressive, or more acceptable than who you actually are. You already are who you are, and that is enough. This shift doesn't make life passive or empty. It doesn't lead to disengagement or withdrawal. What changes is how you move. You act without the constant anxiety that everything has to count, that every decision has to justify your existence. That anxiety fades. In its place comes something simpler and clearer. You do things because they matter to you. You help people because you want to help them, not because it adds something to your legacy. You spend time with your family because you love them, not because it proves you were a good parent. You engage with the world out of genuine interest, not because you need to leave a mark. The difference is subtle, but it touches everything. It's the difference between living under the pressure of needing to be significant and living as someone who already is. Think about an architect who has spent decades building. There was ambition, drive, and a constant question running underneath it all. Is this good enough? Lasting enough? Meaningful enough? Every building was measured against an invisible standard. Is this the masterpiece? Will this be remembered? Did all these years amount to something? Then something shifts. The architect steps back and looks at what already exists. Some buildings are small, others large. Some are elegant, others practical. Some serve people in visible ways, others quietly. But all of them are real. All of them stand. All of them are used. All of them shelter and shape life. At that point, a realization settles in. There is no longer a need to build the greatest building. What needed to be built already exists. The work is complete. The buildings are standing. From here, movement changes. The architect can improve something if it truly needs improvement, simply because it will make life inside it better. Something new can be built if there is a real need for it, not because another achievement is required. Work, rest, and presence all become choices instead of obligations. Time spent inside what already exists becomes as meaningful as creating something new. This is freedom. Not freedom from action, but freedom from pressure. Freedom from constant measurement. Freedom to choose what comes next based on what feels true, what the moment asks for, and what the people around you need, rather than on what must be added to prove worth. What fades in this shift is striking. The sense that time is running out finally settles, because you recognize that something important has already been done. The quiet panic that insists you should be doing more, becoming more, achieving more, begins to quiet. Comparison loses its power. Other lives stop feeling like benchmarks. You're no longer playing that game. The internal exam you never knew was running finally comes to an end. The part of you that was constantly grading your life, measuring whether you had done enough, falls silent. The deliberation stops. The verdict has already been reached. Your life was real. Your choices mattered. Your presence shaped things. There is nothing left to defend. What remains is your actual life. The same people, the same home, the same days, hours, and ordinary moments. The same challenges and the same quiet joys. Nothing outside has changed. What changes is the way you inhabit it. You are no longer living your days while trying to make them add up to something. You are simply living them. And that difference changes everything. Time with your grandchildren becomes a choice rooted in desire, not improving yourself. Reaching out to a friend comes from genuine care, not from the need to appear caring. Interests draw you in because they hold your attention, not because they add another chapter to your story. Rest becomes available because your body and mind ask for it, not because you have finally earned permission. This is clarity. It is the shift from living in service to an image of yourself to living as yourself. From striving to be significant to being fully alive. From constantly translating experience into evidence to simply experiencing your life as it unfolds. And here is what matters most. This freedom does not mean your life stops mattering. Your influence continues to move outward. Your presence still shapes others. The legacy you created does not pause or disappear. It deepens. Without anxiety driving it, without the pressure to prove anything, it becomes quieter and more stable. It becomes the natural result of a life that was lived honestly. You do not need to earn your significance now. It was earned in the ordinary acts you repeated for years, in the way you showed up, in the integrity of your choices, in the love you gave without asking to be seen, in the moments you chose what felt true over what looked impressive. That was the work. That is what endures. Now you are free to live inside that understanding, to move through the years ahead without the need to justify your existence, not to the world, not to yourself, not to any higher measure you once felt accountable to. You have already lived a life. You have already mattered. The question no longer asks whether you did enough. It asks how you want to live now, knowing that you already did. That single shift opens an entirely different way of moving through the world. Chapter 8. The legacy paradox is your proof. You are needed. There is a truth that appears only when you have walked through everything in this book. The final piece emerges when you have looked at your foundation, understood the paradox, and felt the freedom of not needing to prove anything. Only then does everything become clear. The legacy paradox is not a problem to be solved. It is proof. It is evidence of something that was always true but that you needed to see clearly. The paradox works like this. The smaller and more ordinary your life appears on the surface, the deeper and more eternal its impact becomes in the world. The less you demanded recognition, the more you shaped what matters. The quieter you remained, the more clearly your values echoed forward into the next generation and beyond. This is not poetry or philosophy. This is how the world actually works. A single choice echoes forward for decades. A quiet example becomes the blueprint that shapes entire families. A person who never sought recognition ends up being structural to how the world continues. Your life was exactly like that. You were building all along, and you were building what lasts. You asked a question when you began this book, perhaps not out loud, but somewhere deep inside where it matters. Did my life matter? Did I leave something behind? Was I significant? The question came because something inside you understood that significance was not about being famous or rich or having the biggest achievements. You knew it was about something real, something that shaped people and continued beyond you. And here is what matters most. The fact that you ask that question is itself proof of the answer. The person who asks whether their life mattered is already answering the question. This is someone who paid attention to meaning, who understood that a life could be wasted if it wasn't lived in service to something real, who carried values deep enough that they needed to matter. This is someone who built quietly, but built seriously, who realized that significance was not something you grabbed or proved or shouted about, but something you created through the ordinary choices of decades. This person is you, and you are exactly the kind of person who creates lasting legacy because you were already paying attention to what mattered. The people around you felt this presence. Your children felt it in the way you listened without judgment. Your grandchildren felt it in the way you showed up, year after year, consistently. Your friends felt it in the way you kept your word. Your colleagues felt it in the way you treated people who could do nothing for you. And they absorbed it, because they lived next to it. They watched it. It became part of their understanding of how to be a person. Now they carry it forward into their own lives. These are not small things. These are the architecture of the world. This is how meaning persists across generations. This is how a single life becomes eternal. Here is something the world doesn't tell you. You do not need to do anything more to prove that your life has value. Your existence itself is proof. The fact that you are here at this particular time, with your particular gifts and limitations and choices, this is already evidence that you are necessary, because life does not continue anything by accident. The universe does not carry forward what is not needed, and you have been carried forward. Your presence has shaped things. Your consciousness has continued. Your influence has moved through the world in ways you will never fully see. This is not something you have to imagine or hope for. This is something that is already real and already permanent. The legacy paradox reveals itself as simple truth when you stop searching for it. The more you simply lived according to what you believed, the more you became a foundation that others could build on. Your architecture was built not through grandiosity, but through consistency, through showing up, through choosing what was true, through loving without needing recognition. This is why your life mattered. This is why it still matters. What is left now is not work. It is recognition. It is the simple understanding that your life is real. The architect who built through decades of living does not need to build anything more. The work is complete. The structure stands. Now the architect watches how the houses continue to shelter life. Now the architect moves through the remaining years with the understanding that this was enough. This was everything. And if you are reading this, you are that architect. You always have been. The only thing left is to recognize it, to feel the gratitude that comes when you finally see what your life created, to understand that you were needed, that your presence made the world different, to know that the ripples you created will continue long after you are gone. This is the proof you were looking for, not external, not dependent on what others think, but real, written in the lives of people, written in a world that is permanently different because you were in it. You are the legacy paradox. You are the proof. You are needed in this world. You always have been.